Hello everyone and welcome to another Mission Makers vlog. Today we're going to be talking about getting started. Now in this series I've talked about a lot of advanced concepts that usually involved theories between how people think, work, and participate in missions. I think it's about time that I answer some of the questions I've been asked in terms of where you even start in terms of making missions. Now something you have to remember is that missions in Arma 3 are no different from making levels in any other games. Level design, in fact, is an entire career based around it. And a lot of those same theories still apply in the Arma 3 engine. In fact, the editor, and now known as Eden, is in fact a game engine that has scripts and commands that are properly set in order to create specific types of scenario that you want to make. This type of freedom may not be as complicated or on par to the level of complexity that CryEngine or Unity may have, but they certainly have the same concepts that drive behind them. So first things first is that you want to think about what you want to do in terms of the mission. Do you want it to be scenery and atmospheric based, or do you want it to be gameplay based? Typically, I like to choose gameplay based, so we're going to talk about that one first. Now, when you think about the gameplay for a mission, you mainly want to think about what the players are going to be doing, what you know they're going to do, and what they're going to have to do. I feel like the best way to explain this is to use an example, so I'm going to talk about a mission that I recently made. A mission named Operation Skeleton Key, which involved two teams attacking two enemy bases simultaneously in order to capture enemy intelligence that told them where the final objective was. Now, when thinking of this objective, I knew that I wanted two separate teams to have to communicate over long range in order to do some math and number crunching in order to find out where their final attack needed to be so that they can regroup and have one last epic attack on the last zone. What I knew they were going to do is that they were going to have to attack two objectives simultaneously. That sort of payoff is extremely satisfying even if you don't directly get to see it. Really feels like you're part of a machine when you start seeing the real results come out of it in terms of two squads attacking at once. So if you go to my objective types video where I talk about different types of objectives that I've thought of and different types of varieties of gameplay, this particular mission I would rate under Intel Grab, which involved two teams going in, grabbing intelligence, and then ultimately finding out what their final objective was. Now from the start, I knew I wanted to do this type of objective. That's where you have to start. What type of objective do you want them to do? Do you want them to steal a vehicle? Do you want them to capture an HVT? Do you want them to escort someone? Or rather, do you want them to just assault and secure something, ambush someone, or anything else that you can think of? This is where the creativity really comes into play. You have to be creative with what the players are doing, so that way you're not making them do the same thing every time. Second thing you need to think about is the environment. Now, while this may be related to the setting and the atmosphere, we're not quite out of gameplay yet. We're still talking about gameplay. So talking about the setting from a gameplay perspective, do we want them to move along water, open fields, desert, forest? What environment can provide the best gameplay for your mission? For my mission, Operation Skeleton Key, I decided to put people in Takistan because it would give people high ground on mountains, give them wide overwatch on areas without being seen by the enemy yet, and allow them to wait for their simultaneous attack. I also chose there because I found two cities that were close enough that they would be able to hear gunshots from the other fight without having direct line of sight on it behind the mountains. This provided additional atmosphere to the mission when attacking both objectives. Sometimes you may have to just scroll through the different types of maps, look around them in Eden or Zeus, and just sort of explore around and see if you find somewhere new that you haven't seen before. You may end up finding somewhere that works much better for your mission than you originally intended. After finding the map that you want to use, now you have to decide what you want them to take. What assets do they have available? Do you want to send them in via chopper, via ground vehicles, or do you want to give them a choice? Remember that if you're giving people the option between helicopter, boat, car, or whatever, that you support whatever option they pick. If you really want them to take a certain way, then you should tell them that that's the way they're taking, so that way you can enhance the gameplay that you originally intended. Otherwise, you risk running the fault of them taking whatever that they wanted to take and not really knowing the advantages or disadvantages that come from taking that specific route. Now, we're only going to talk a little bit about the actual factions that you can fight. For the most part, they're inconsequential. They're all going to have guns. They're all going to have about the same level of equipment. Some might have vests, some might not. That's a huge difference. That if you have militia type units, they're not going to have vests. If you have PMC or trained military, they're going to have vests. And that will obviously increase the difficulty. So take that into account mainly, but make sure that the enemies that they are fighting fit the atmosphere. So if it's an African type island, then have African militia. If it's a Middle Eastern type country, Afghan militia. If you're fighting a militia, or you can always pretty much apply Russians and CSAT anywhere. Keep AAF to Altis and Stratus, except for outlying narrative reasons, of course, you can always have. But for the most part, just make sure it makes sense. And that's about it for the first part in terms of getting started. I mean, at this point, you have the map chosen, you know the type of objective you want them to do, you know the types of enemies that they're fighting, and you know which way they're going to start the mission. So for the most part, everything from there is pretty much your own intuition using Zeus and knowing what to respond to certain situations with. And I'll talk about that in a future video probably, so maybe a getting started part 2, talking about things that people should know about Zeus in terms of responding to certain situations that should be second nature to advanced mission makers. So look forward to that in the future, but for now, thank you for watching, and see you next time on Mission Makers Vlog.